A very good morning and thanks for joining us on yet another edition of Political Spectrum. It's live on Spectrum Television. I am Raymond Ater and we're putting you through the day's biggest political news stories and events as preparations, of course, are in top gear for what is expected to be a hopefully seamless transition of power from one current administration to the other. Well, in the spirit of the commemoration of the Eid al-Fitr celebration across Nigeria, which marks the end of the holy month of Ramadan, President Muhammadu Buhari, in a solemn message to the Muslims, as the conduct of general elections in the country is concerned. In a statement issued by Garba Shehu's spokesperson yesterday, the president said he was satisfied with the conduct of the 2023 elections, describing it as one of the proud achievements of his administration. That will form the basis of our discussion when we do come back from this time out. But let's start off with our regular update of the day's biggest political news stories and events. And arguably, it has to begin from Adamawa, the aftermath of the governorship elections, or you could say the aftermath of the rerun governorship elections, where President Muhammadu Buhari has ordered the removal. Was contained in a statement issued yesterday by the Office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation and the Director of Information in that ministry, Willie Bassi. Well, the dismissal from office or the suspension of Mr. Yunusa Ari is pending the completion of an investigation by the included Adamawa supplementary election. Now, according to the brief communique, the president has also directed the immediate investigation and prosecution of Barrister Yunusa Ari, if found liable by the IGP, and has stressed the Nigeria Security and Civil Defense Corps on the role of their respective officers in aiding and abetting the conduct of Barrister Yunusa, and if found culpable, appropriate disciplinary actions are to be meted out to them. Let's move on now. President-elect Bola Ahmed Tinubu has submitted inauguration. Now, the committee has been saddled with the responsibility and task of planning what is expected to be a week-long inauguration activities that will usher in Bola Tinubu and his vice president-elect, Senator Kashim Shettima, as president and vice president of the country, respectively, and in silver ceremony left. Now, the development is also coming a few weeks after the president-elect nominated former Lagos State Finance Commissioner Wale Edun, as well as Governor Atiku Bagudu of Kebbi State, into the PTC. In the 14-member list of the PTC, the spokesman of the Tinubu Deputy Chairman North of the All Progressives Congress, Senator Abubakar Kyari, will coordinate and direct the committee's finance and budget ahead of the inauguration. Let's move on to other matters. Now, following the conclusion of the just concluded National Assembly elections and the submissions by the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, the National Assembly, in conjunction with the Institute of Legislative and Democratic Studies, has released the dates for the induction of the new lawmakers. Now, the management further stated that it was prepared for the induction of the lawmakers of the 10th on media and publicity. Ali Moru noted that the induction program would be held in 2 batches. According to the statements, the induction breakdown is scheduled to commence from May 7. The Assembly also noted that as part of efforts to ensure a very successful induction and inauguration exercise, the management led by the Clerk of the National Assembly, Sani Tambawal, and constituted a Central Planning Committee, which is made up of all the secretaries' objectives. Let's move on now. The Labour Party presidential candidate, Mr. Peter Obi, has called for calm amongst his supporters in the face of provocation and has urged them to show calm as well as restraint. In a statement yesterday, Obi said recent events in the country, including the political development in Adamawa State, clearly underlines the importance of adhering to the rule to pray for a better and a greater country in the face of divisive elements threatening to rip the country apart in the aftermath of the just concluded elections. Well, staying with the Labour Party and its internal crisis, the Director General of the Labour Party Presidential Campaign Council and the Justice Hamza Muazu of a Federal Capital Territory High Court, which ordered the Labour Party's National Chairman, Julius Abure, and others to stop parading themselves as officers of the party, had engendered the infighting currently rocking the Labour Party. Now, Shuntokun maintained that the judge had the option of retaining the chairman while the case goes on, adding that he rather chose an option showing that he was setting the party up for crisis. He reiterated. Well, let's wrap up our update by going to Sokoto State. Well, the Governorship Petition Tribunal in Sokoto have acceded to the request made by Malam Saidu Umar, who is the candidate of the People's Democratic Party PDP, to inspect electoral materials that were used by INEC during the March 18 governorship election in Sokoto. Urged that the election was flawed. Now, Umar and the PDP are challenging the outcome of the election at the Governorship Election Petition Tribunal in Sokoto, where the petition has filed an ex-parte application trying to be granted access to inspect sensitive materials that INEC, the sworn affidavit, ordered that the application should be granted. Now, there's the fourth respondent in the case, being INEC. Its agents as well as its officials have been directed forthwith in a day-by-day sequence to allow the applicants or their respective representatives to inspect, to scan, as well as to obtain the true copies of all the polling documents and other electoral materials that were used in the conduct of the governorship poll in Sokoto on the 18th of March. Tambuwal administration, and disappointing to see that not only did the PDP lost out in Sokoto, Governor Tambuwal himself lost out in the race to go to the National Assembly, where he was aspiring. Comments made by President Muhammadu Buhari at the just concluded Eid al-Fitr celebration. In his solemn message to the Muslim faithful in the country, the president factored in his role in the just concluded elections by describing the 2023 polls as one of the proudest achievements of his administration. He says he has bequeathed a legacy of free, fair and credible polls to Nigeria. Was in the right direction or not. When we come back from this timeout, burning stories with keenly focus on the role the president played in this election and whether or not posterity will judge him right by his own assessment of the 2023 polls. Stick around when we come back. Political Spectrum will continue.
Every day, we bring you up-to-date information on topical issues affecting the common Nigerian. From issues on politics,
hello Nigeria, I remain committed.
Security, and Uyai Anyagin every weekday from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. on Rise and Shine Daily, exclusive on Spectrum Television.
Welcome back and many thanks for joining us. You're watching Political Spectrum live on Spectrum Television, where we do well to x-ray the day's biggest political news stories and events, including the general elections, and whether it met international best practices or standards, or the opinion and expectations of most Nigerians in the lead up to the polls, as assured by Mr. President, as well as the electoral umpire in the country, INEC. Following the February 25th National Assembly and presidential elections, where Bola Ahmed Tinubu of the All Progressive rise by irregularities and alleged manipulation of results in favor of certain political parties as well as candidates. But Mr. Mahmoud Yakubu has severally been urged to step down from his role, as they would require as much as 3 billion naira, yes, to be able to prosecute post-election litigations, leading to questions coming in from different quarters as to whether INEC had not flattered to deceive as far as the promises it made to Nigerians on ensuring free, fair and credible polls were concerned. Well, everyone had been asked to congratulate the president-elect, and had since then reiterated his desire and ambition to seamlessly transfer power to the incoming administration of President-elect Bola Tinubu, and has also urged the aggrieved parties at the just concluded polls to channel their grievances to court if they were dissatisfied with the outcome of the polls. INEC's general position around this election is also premised on the fact that it gave Nigerians its utmost best, and have said skirmishes recorded and witnessed in several places are not enough. Well, we know the Eid al-Fitr celebration is winding down following the holy month of Ramadan, where Muslims have been engaged in a month of fasting. And in a solemn message to the Muslim faithful in the country, Mr. President reiterated that the 2023 elections were, one of the proudest achievements of his administration, and he insists that he given everyone a free. Had actually lost out in some elections, and he did not interfere. I wonder if that has anything to do with the latest drama we witnessed in Adamawa State, or Mr. President is premising the entirety of his argument on the generality of action. Well, some would say Mr. President was quite right. If we look at the National Assembly elections, for instance, it's arguably going to be one of the most polarized legislatures in the nation's history, because you had ordinarily, of the Green Chambers, that's the House of Representatives, and equally having a couple of senators to show for in the Red Chambers, that's the Senate. So on that premise, you could say there were big upsets along the way, but not just for the ruling APC. The main opposition party in the country, the PDP, also experienced. We saw the Labour Party picking up at least one state in Abia, where Governor Alex Oti, against expectations and attempts to truncate the process, emerged the governor-elect of Abia State. They nearly got it in other states as well. And going forward, with some of the elections we're expecting to take place in the country before the end of this year, some of these parties are gearing up to equally pull off another big upset. So maybe going by the numbers, some would agree with Mr. President's position that perhaps see any rush command or directive from the presidency in the entirety of this election, even though in the build-up to the polls, there seemed to have been, some kind of show of force by, the military in the country. We saw vehicles and tankers, patrolling several streets across Nigeria in the lead up to the polls on the respective election days. But we didn't see any kind of incident that would degenerate to a chaos that would warrant the deployment of army officers in the country. So on that line, security parameters to judge or determine how free, fair and credible the elections were. Well, your answer is as good as mine. We're premising it on those 3 points. Just the fact that in some locations across the country, there were pockets of reports of, people being intimidated. That's the voters are not allowed to exercise their. They were not in sync with the instructions handed out to persons who constituted the polling population in that area, as far as the aspirations of a particular political party or a candidate is concerned. Now, if you followed us up during the course of the electioneering and our coverage of the entire exercise, melting point as far as the elections were concerned actually took place. We saw polling units where persons were told they were not going to vote for a particular party or a candidate. They could just as well head back to their respective. Really amounts to your liberty to make a decision and stick to it. But as opposed to the incidences we saw across the country, it appears the elections were a far cry, the electoral, or rather the political elite in the country. So apart from being attacked, intimidated not to vote, and then widespread vote buying, which in some ways amounts to weaponizing poverty, and by so doing, tilting the minds of people through cash gifts and the president's personal assertion of himself that the elections were indeed free. A right assertion or not. What about the fairness of the polls? I think we were well inundated with reports in the early hours of the elections day on February 25 precisely that some people might vote for Party A, and then I discovered that the logo of the party, it's not on the ballot papers. I would not be forced to cast my vote for another party simply because widespread disenfranchisement. And we had a lot of this report in several locations across the country, especially in the southwest and especially in Lagos. And if we have to hit the nail on the head, a bulk of the concerns were routed around the Labour Party, most of whom, with respect to the information from the polling agents and some of the reports we got firsthand, appears this year would mean every of the 18 parties registered in the country to take part in these elections shouldn't have their logos printed on the ballot, so voters have a right to make a choice of whom they want when they get to the polls. Or when this was the case, and there's a small matter of credibility as well, because we're looking at the freeness, fairness, and the credible state of this election. A lot of talk has been following the incident and development in Adamawa State recently, where the now suspended resident electoral commissioner, Yunusa Ari, took questions as to whether or not he had acted alone. But the face-off and the standoff that the incident has developed seems to show that INEC is quite keen, to paint itself in a good light in the face of Nigerians who have been quite critical of the commission in the aftermath of this year's election. But it begs the question, did we or did we not see similarities with the incidents in Adamawa at the National Coalition Center in Abuja? We saw party agents of some parties, the PDP and the Labour Party precisely, stage a walkout on the national chairman of INEC, Professor dissatisfied with the coalition process. One of the agents, in this case, the PDP's coalition process in Ekiti State in particular, it looked like there was something around the numbers that only the BVAS will have authenticated. But Mr. Mahmood Yakubu, the national chairman of INEC, went ahead to announce the results regardless, giving his own reasons as to why he chose and electoral guidelines. But the results still stood. And whoever it is was adjudged to have won the election coalition of the presidential elections after February 25 polls. So why didn't we have a grandstanding of the situation from the coalition? Of course, let's say the Ekiti story in connection with the presidential coalition was that the coalition exercise in Adamawa State was still ongoing before Mr. Yunusa Ari decided to announce Aishatu Binani of the APC, who was the only official of INEC mandated by law to announce results of elections. Or that could be right in terms of factoring in the whole debate around the announcement of Aisha Binani as governor-elect, as opposed to the case of the national chairman of INEC, Mr. Mahmood Yakubu, during the collation of the presidential election. Yakubu should have waved aside the continuation of collation of results from Ekiti State. For instance, we had many more cases where there were apparent manipulation or irregularities characterizing the entire exercise. But let's focus on Ekiti. So they experienced or witnessed first-hand irregularities that they felt amounted to, manipulation of results, because the figures collated at the end of the day did not tally with what the BVAS process for Ekiti, for instance, suspended until the irregularities were sorted out. But this is just one of many other cases that we had so many, party agents, come out to claim that INEC was, being come from parent embarrassment in Enugu, or rather in Anambra, Adamawa, begging your pardon, are brought to book. We've heard about information that Mr. Yunusa has been formally suspended. And also the Inspector General of Police has been ordered to carry out an investigation in with electoral provisions and constitutional guidelines as far as the election in Adamawa State was concerned. Not only that, We've also been told that the president asked State Services DSS to investigate their officers who were said to be culpable in the pretty heinous acts carried out by Mr. Yunusa Ari, and to ensure that appropriate measures as far as the incident in Adamawa is concerned. Dr. Yunusa Ari is suspended from his role as REC. But we would have wanted to see something similar in other locations across the country where it appeared in a characteristic manner. The electoral provisions around whose right it was to announce election results. And even if he had to do so with the opposition as REC, which was still illegal, the fact that he did so when the coalition exercise was still on roll, first-hand irregularities in cases where results were not transmitted electronically, as was provided by the electoral arms, electronically or through the use of the BVAS to authenticate it. But we saw that being used in the governorship election. So why was there some level of deviation from the presidential post as opposed to the March 18 exercise? And when you juxtapose all of the president will call it his proudest achievement as far as elections in Nigeria is concerned, well, you only need to do the simple task of going over it in the 2003, 2007, which has a huge question mark on its back, the 2011 post, 2015, and of course 2019 elections, which preceded the just concluded 2023 post. Have we had incidences to measure which could actually say was the best or by far the worst, to score himself high in the face of a barrage of criticisms that have scored his administration pretty low in virtually every sector of the nation's economy? And so much so, some have said this shouldn't be Mr. President's duty. It shouldn't be his job to determine whether the elections were free and fair. Observers, we had the United Nations observers, we had the African Union, we had the EU, we had ECOWAS, all sending in representatives to monitor this election alongside the local observers. Well, if we have to judge by the reports coming in from a bulk of these observers, then it's easy to tell that there are contentious issues that should be addressed as far as these elections were concerned. Just touching on comments made by some of the international observers observed in several other locations. They did factor in the inability of the BVAS to be properly deployed in some polling units, lots of polling units as a matter of fact, during the February 25 elections. But they did observe that the BVAS did not malfunction as opposed to February 25 when we had the governorship and state assembly elections on March 18. But they also gave records of apparent voter intimidation. I think if we have to around electoral materials being damaged or hijacked by thugs in some polling units across the country, and also the inability of INEC to give Nigerians the free, fair and credible polls that they promised. This was more or less a summary of what the international observer exclusive of the Nigerian government. What has the Nigerian government said in this regard? Statements coming out from the presidential quarters had always maintained that the aggrieved parties should channel their grievances to court. And that's something the leading opposition parties in the country and the losers at the elections, the PDP and the Labour Party, as well as their respective presidential candidates, are interface between the Minister of Information and Culture, Lai Mohammed, and the international media in Washington, D.C. Lai Mohammed stopped short of explaining to the international press why there were still concerns about whether the elections were free and fair. Instead, it delved into bigotry in the wake of the purported leaked audio that apparently said it was the Labour Party candidate in a conversation with a religious cleric, not just clamoring for votes, but also describing the elections as a religious war. So much so that you would describe the presidential candidate of another party as promoting ethnic bigotry. Well, Mr. Peter Obi did respond in like manner and said the statement made by Mr. Lai Mohammed were quite divisive and doesn't represent a true picture of the development on ground. And he has distanced himself from the purported faction with the rhetoric pushed by Mr. Lai Mohammed, and we had some persons condemning his choice of words with regards to the statement. What everyone wants to see is whether or not the elections were free, fair and credible. As Mr. President has said, is one of his proudest presidents when he returned to the country shortly after the US-Africa Leadership Summit back in January. And on the back of that visit, Mr. President was described as a model of democracy by US President Joe Biden, and he said he was an example for other give Nigerians the credibility of the polls that was expected. But you can already tell by the body language of virtually interested parties in the aftermath of that elections, this may not necessarily Presidential Campaign Council recently come out to question why Mr. Joe Biden is yet to congratulate Bola Tinubu as president-elect, as being declared by INEC after the election. Until you have a phone call from arguably the most powerful man in the world, it would not amount to a recognition of Tinubu's status as president-elect. So the APC is somehow yearning and as if to, pour more fire on what is already a burning ash. You having the likes of respected writer Chimamanda coming up to, write a pretty long letter to the US president about her condition of the Nigerian voter. It's left to be seen what the US would do with respect to the letter that was actually written to them by the respected writer Chimamanda, who, by the way, enjoys a dual citizenship of the US and Nigeria. And speaking about dual citizenship, there have been recent rhetoric pushed around in recent days about the authenticity of the nationality of the presidential candidate of the APC and now president-elect Bola Tinubu. An ongoing effort to unravel the true state of his identity by renowned by Twitter themselves, because they felt he breached their micro-blogging platform's requirements as far as releasing information on another user is concerned. While we know David's account has been restored, on his West Africa Blogspot account, he has reiterated that he feels by Mr. David Ondane. But if you've gone through most of the tweets that he made before Twitter did lock his account, well, by the way, Twitter only locked the accounts but did not take down the information. So it is pretty much still out there for everyone to have access to. And in his claims, he has said Tinubu, as well, these are claims that would require top-end investigation, not just by the Nigerian government, but also the Ghanaian government. And he personally feels it's not something, especially with ex-president Alpha Conde. How true these allegations are is pretty much left to be seen. But these are very damning revelations about President-elect Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and whether it will, of course, not affect the time frame for the transition. The matter's being handled in court presently, but will continue dominating the political scene as we lead up to May 29. Well, stick around when we come back from a short and final. As president, opinion is divided on this, but we'll find out more when we come back. Do stay with us, Political Spectrum. We'll return.
One truth not often told is about the transformation that Africa has undergone in recent decades. Africa is shaping its own destiny and should be referred to as the African opportunity. On Spotlight Africa, we paint the African picture the African way, laced with truth, detail, and the color of the African continent. Join Uyai Anyekan every Tuesday and Thursdays at 4:30 p.m. Spotlight Africa, telling the African story.
Business exists only to meet the needs of the people, but there's an extra advantage if your product and services are pitched on a platform that gives you the added advantage over your competitors. For your desired return on investment and so much more, advertise on Spectrum Television, on StarTime's DTH Channel 421 and on free-to-air with a frequency of 12733.
Every society is premised on the quality of relationship and how long they stick together. Join Uyai Anyekan on Connect every Wednesday from 6 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. and on Sunday, 2/3 relationships and family life in the 21st century. Real people, real faces, real stories. Connect live on Spectrum Television.
Business exists only to meet the needs of the people, but there's an extra advantage if your product and services are pitched on a platform that gives you the added advantage over your competitors. For Channel 421 and on free-to-air with a frequency of 12733. Spectrum Television, broadening your horizon.
As always, you can connect with us on StarTimes DTH Channel 421, and for live feeds, just head to our social media platforms on YouTube, where you can subscribe to keep up with any of the latest that you may have missed. And just a reminder of our major story this morning. President Muhammadu Buhari made the comment in a Salah Day message to Muslim faithful in the country on the occasion of the Eid al-Fitr celebration, which marked the end of and candidates. So much so that even when members of his own party lost out in some elections, he personally did not interfere. Well, over the two expectations, it stated freeness, fairness, and the credibility of the exercise we saw on February 25, March 18, and of course the April 15 supplementary President Electoral Commissioner for INEC in the state, Barrister Yunusa Ari Hudu, by going ahead to announce a result also of an election where coalition was still ongoing in Adamawa State. The IGP, Usman Baba Alkali, has also been asked to commence investigation hearing. There's also been a command issued out to the DSS DG and also the command. Governor Madu Finturi of the PDP was declared governor-elect by the returning officer people. That's two.
That Umaru Ahmadu Finturi of PDP having satisfied the requirement of the law is hereby declared the winner and returned.
A jubilant scenes greeting the formal announcement of Governor Madu Finturi as governor-elect of Adamawa State by Mohammed Mele, the returning officer at the Adamawa Tamata. The outcome of the process was one that many would say represented the will of the people. Well, it's not just in Adamawa. We saw the development in Abia State a few weeks back when Professor Oti, the returning officer for that election, stood her ground. She said she did this in the face of intimidation from certain quarters who tried to bribe her and threaten her if she did not, subvert the will of the people. Well, this is just one of the few incidents where it appeared people's power, reflected the true nature of the elections and tweeted free, fair elections to Nigerians. And it says it's a legacy. Lots of social media reaction to Mr. President's accession has been greeted with some rather comic responses as well. Some persons have said the president's legacy has only been divisive. Others have used words like legacy in the mud and several other kind of language to describe Mr. President's statement yesterday. And that it is what the Constitution provides that gets its way in terms of adjudging whether these elections met constitutional or electoral provisions. A lot of things have to be virtually looked at. One of the biggest contentious issues here is whether or not the APC candidate and president-elect Bola Tinubu admit the losing candidates and parties are actually hinging their arguments on in court. There's also the small matter of whether results should have been transmitted electronically as provided in the Electoral Act and also confirmed by the INEC chairman Mahmoud Yakubu, met all the expectations. What about reports of locations where results were apparently doctored during the coalition exercise? We saw some returning apparent doctoring of results and several other skirmishes that were enough to render such a result sheet as null and void, but all the same, the results were announced as they came in. And results, of course, came in from areas where elections reportedly did not even take place at all. There were also skirmishes around, results from result sheets tallying with provisions of the BVAS, bypassing information on the BVAS in favor of, information on paper that apparently could have been doctored, and not deciding to cross-check is just another small matter that would be looked at in the course of litigation. Well, we know, of course, to a great extent, some of the losing parties this election, whether or not that would aid them in the bid to reclaim their mandate, as they put it, that were lost in the elections, is also left to be seen. But I'm pretty sure the rest of the country, the international community as well, will have their sight fixated on Nigeria in the coming days, especially as we approach May 29, where President Buhari is expected to hand over power to a new administration. And the workings are in place for PTC to begin preparations for what is expected to be a week-long event for the inauguration of Tinubu and Shettima as president and vice respectively on May and the House of Representatives, beginning from May 7 to May 20, ahead of the formal inauguration as lawmakers come June. So you could see that preparations are still continuing and in top gear for a formal transfer of power from Buhari to Tinubu. The Nigerian army has also re-echoed same sentiment that they have said they will ensure smooth transition of power come May 29, meaning any move or step to truncate this process would simply amount to an attempt to divide the country or promote divisive elements, as has already been claimed by the DSS. Let's not forget, recently the DSS issued a statement to claim that there were some persons planning to install it cannot be said as to who these faces are, even though Nigerians have charged the DSS to come out with the names and faces of those they say are behind this plot. The grand schemes that has been deployed by some parties, in particular administration, in the current administration rather, throw tantrums at a leading opposition candidate by claiming he was promoting divisive sentiments in the country by stirring up religious bigotry, referring already his vice presidential candidate, Mr. Dati Ahmed, has also been fingered for making comments about post-Buhari administration when he claimed that going ahead to swear in Mr. Tinubu on May 29 would be an unconstitutional move. Well, it's a statement that has drawn divisive reactions across the country. Some saying that Mr. Dati Ahmed spoke out of turn in the process because Mr. Dati Ahmed clearly premised his argument on the fact that Mr. Tinubu did not meet constitutional requirements of winning in 25% of states across the country, or the FCT. And the FCT, as is the constitutional provision. Let's be very clear, so we're not quoted out of context yet. And on the unconstitutional. So would we say that Mr. Dati Ahmed spoke out of turn by saying you do not meet constitutional requirements, and so doing this would amount to an unconstitutional move? Well, terminologically speaking, you could say he was right, because something that is not constitutional, the opposite means tribunal at the Court of Appeal stage for the presidential post, is ongoing and will surely attend to these matters as they continue, except that the fears of most Nigerians is whether or not the court will be allowed to operate independently and without influence from external forces in ensuring that the mandate of Nigerians is what will see the light of the day either on May 29 or post-May 29. Matters in us today, but the conversation does continue via our social media handles. We encourage you to check us out on Spectrum TV by simply heading to our website, spectrumtv.ng. But that's the size of political spectrum for today and for the week as well. But I'll be back again on Monday, God's willing. Do well to keep a date with us if you can. But from me, Raymond Ita, and the rest of the crew, thanks for watching, and bye for now.